Hello, everyone. Welcome to Fearfully and Wonderfully Me. Today's episode continues our series on the elements of growth and transformation. And you may have noticed, or maybe you haven't noticed, the first three elements of growth and transformation are self-belief, self-worth, and self-love. And our last 9 episodes have really dug into an element of those transformation elements. So you may or may not have noticed, though, that those first 3 elements focus on mindset, right? Self-belief, self-worth, self-love, that's all about mindset. And the reason that those first 3 are dedicated to mindset is because mindset is the foundation for lasting change. Transformation is more about who you are rather than what you do. Because who you are and who you are becoming is going to affect and determine and influence what you do. But it's not just about doing something different, because that won't last, right? If you just try to change a behavior, it's going to be short term. It won't bring about lasting transformation. When you change the way you think intentionally, that brings about lasting growth and transformation. So it's not just about ticking the boxes, right? It's not just about just focusing on doing something different. It's becoming someone different. So I really like to focus on that. So as we start to shift now from those first 3 elements into the next elements, we're kind of shifting a little bit somewhat from focusing on mindset to now focusing a little bit on the things that we do because of the shift in mindset that we made. So I want to talk today, today's episode is all about self-respect and choosing your values. And the reason that this is important is because what you most value is going to determine what you think, which is going to determine how you feel, which determines what you do, which determines what results you get in life, what outcomes you get. Andy Stanley reminds us that character demands commitment to values. Now, there are hundreds or thousands of different values, and some of your values will grow and change as you grow and change, because that develops your character. So the thing is, just intentionally choosing your values rather than kind of just accepting them by default. So for example, when we value health, we make different choices that support that. If we aren't making really great health choices the majority of the time, then we don't really necessarily value great health. And that's kind of tough, because everyone would say, oh yes, I value my health is important. But not everybody really means it or values it enough to do something about it. Now, it's not easy. We talked a lot in the last episode about not being perfect, but improving. And it's not about getting it right all of the time. But if you truly value your health, if you really do value it, you'll make some good choices. You'll exercise at least a couple times a week. You'll make some good nutritional choices, eating a little bit less of the toxic things and more of the more nutritional things. So think about this for a moment as you answer your questions. Do you value your health? What do your choices reveal? Do you value family time? What does your calendar say? What truth is your calendar saying? Do you value saving money for some hard times? Does your bank account reveal that? Could you show an example of how that's important and how you're living that? Do you value improving yourself or your circumstances? Does your reading habits or growing habits show that, reflect that? Right? See, a lot of times we say something is important to us, but we don't necessarily mean it. And we don't really mean it or value it, or we would do it. It's just, It's a fact. When you value something, you spend time thinking about it and doing it and protecting it. So I can't choose your values and you can't choose mine, and no one can tell you that your values aren't the right values for you. But what I am saying is you should intentionally choose your values, and then you can be intentional about living them out. Obviously, my values have changed a lot as I've grown. In 2013, I valued pouring into other people more than I valued a successful career on the career path that I was following, right? I just had grown enough to the point where that I valued something else more than I valued that career path. And let me tell you, I worked really hard. I went to college. I went to college 10 years to get that degree that would help me be successful in the job that I had. And it was a good job. It was a great job, a good organization. But my values had shifted. And no one could tell me that that was a bad thing or the wrong thing for me. It might not be the right thing for someone else, but it was the right thing for me. And because my values shifted, then I resigned from that job and I started this journey. So when I say I value pouring into other people and helping people, I can show you how I've sacrificed to make that a reality. I mean, and I think I've shared with you before, Mac and I gave up everything when we started this journey because there was an enormous amount of sacrifice. We had to downsize our life because there for a long time we downsized our income. You don't shift from having a very successful career to walking out of that career and then suddenly having a successful speaking business. It didn't happen that way. It doesn't happen that way. It takes a lot of time to build up when you're starting a speaking and writing business from scratch. And, I kind of jumped off, but both of us really did. We just kind of jumped off and flipped a switch and said, no, we're going. And that meant a lot of sacrifices. But no one could tell us that that was a bad choice for us because we valued it and we were willing to sacrifice because we valued it. So I want you to think about that, intentionally choosing your values. I want you to stop the podcast and think about what's really most important to you. Literally press pause right now and just spend the next couple of minutes and reflect on what's really important. What are your top 5 values? And I want you to write them down. Literally, if you're driving, don't write them down, but you could name them off, put it that way. Now, if you didn't stop and do that, then I know you're just going, you're listening to this podcast, but maybe you're not serious about shifting in that mindset. You've got to be intentional about it. So stop and do it. If you didn't stop and do it, really stop now and do it. Did you do it? Okay. Just listening to information doesn't change our minds. I forget who says it. Information isn't transformation, right? The greatest gap in the world is the gap between what we know and what we do. If we're not taking action on the information, it doesn't do us any good. So if you didn't stop and think about your top 5 values, then I can't really help you intentionally live them. You got to know what they are. Now, if you already know your top 5 values, then you didn't have to stop and think about them, of course. But I want you to think about how you can be more intentional about aligning your behaviors with them. So an example of that was because I value pouring into people, I started this podcast, right? We just started season 3. I cannot believe it's season 3 already. But that was an example of how when I had 2 years ago, or just a little over 2 years ago, I discovered the platform that would help me pour into people in a different way. And so because I valued that, I got a little more intentional about aligning some of my behaviors to do it. So, and that just means dedicating the time. It takes some time to create a podcast and to do the episodes. And the content and the actual recording, and all of that takes some time, but that's okay. It's just an example of how I got a little closer to aligning my behavior with my value. That's why I intentionally dedicate the first few minutes of my day thinking about my priorities for the day. I've talked a lot with you before about my morning routine and my motivational planning journals, and how I created those journals just because I looked around for a tool that would help me be just intentional about a couple of minutes of my day. Being intentional about every dimension. Being intentional about what am I going to do today to be healthier? What am I going to do today to add value to someone else? It's incredible when I spend just a couple minutes thinking about what am I going to do today to add value to someone. Very often it's Mac because, well, for one thing, he's the only other person in our house. But I think of, every morning I spend just a couple minutes thinking, what am I going to do to add value to someone today? But here's the thing, when I'm intentional about that, I am much more likely to do it because I have aligned my thoughts and with that behavior. So when we're intentional about it, we are intentional about doing it. It's much easier to do rather than just saying, well, yeah, it's important to me to have a good relationship with Mac. Of course it is. We're married. But how is my behavior really demonstrating that? Well, for me, that means spending a couple of minutes every day thinking, well, how can I add value to him? Maybe it's just run an errand for him, or maybe it's cooking something that he likes, or whatever it is. Let me just be intentional about demonstrating that value in our relationship, demonstrating that I value that relationship. The simplest things in life are usually the most powerful when we do them. When we do them. So, if you want to be a little more intentional about your day, get up a little earlier if you need to. If you hit the snooze button 10 times in the morning, that's a good sign that you are content with staying where you are. Now, I know some people are not morning people, but you got to pay the price to get better. And that means developing the self-discipline and keeping the commitment to yourself. If you got to get up a little earlier to intentionally plan your day, do it. If you absolutely cannot do it in the morning, do it the night before, right? Figure out a way that works for you. But if you're not going to invest your time to be intentional about living your values, they're not really your values. And that's something I say, and I almost want to cringe when I say it because a lot of people aren't going to like to hear that. But if you're not living your values out, those aren't really your values. I can tell. I'm recording this podcast. It's actually Saturday. I know it comes out on Tuesday for you, but today it's Saturday when I'm actually recording this. And I wanted to do a post this morning. It was just on my heart to challenge people through, I do a lot of posting on social media, just as reminders, encouragement, great motivational quotes, things like that. But I wanted today's post to really challenge people to think about, it's Saturday. A lot of people in summertime, a lot of people are, maybe going to the lake today, and they're going to spend all day on the lake and, kind of enjoy the weekend, and they've worked hard all week. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you use all of your free day today, all of your day off today, to just have fun and blow it at the lake, nothing wrong with that. But if you do that every single day, every single time you have some free time, you're vegging out in front of Netflix, or or hanging out, or going to dinner, or going to the clubs, or whatever, then you're not allowing yourself any time to grow. And so it's Saturday. A lot of people are going to spend today and tomorrow. They're going to sleep late, stay up later, maybe watch more TV, or whatever their version of recreation is. And there again, absolutely nothing wrong with that. But a lot of those same people who are blowing off every weekend would tell you that they're not happy about something in their life. They would absolutely tell you, oh yes, I want a better job. But their choices on the weekend, when they have time to improve themselves, to grow themselves, to work towards a better job, don't really show that, right? There are people that tell you they value their health, but their choices don't really show that. And that's a hard truth, right? It's a hard truth, and it calls some people out sometimes to say if you're not living out your values, they're not really your values. And I know that that's kind of uncomfortable. That's one of those things that when I say it, I know there are people that don't want to hear that. They won't want to hear that. That's hard to say. So think about your values, and hopefully you did, or you already know your top 5. And now I'm going to challenge you just a little bit more. What if you had to narrow them down to just 2? Which ones would you pick? Which 2 values in your life reflect who you are? And when I first thought about this, I didn't want to choose just 2, right? I wanted a lot of values. Good values are good, right? Of course they are. I just want to challenge you to think about what's really most important. If you could only pick 2, you're going to pick the top 2, right? My top 2 are joy and love. Those 2 values are my top 2. And when I really thought about it, I sat down and thought about it. It wasn't fun because I didn't want to choose just 2, because I'm like, man, I value my health. But that's not really my top 2. It's not in my top 2. It's in my top 5. It's not in my top 2. And when I really drilled down and forced myself to just say, what are my top 2 values? I realized that I'd known it all along because I live them every day in some way. Like, I choose every single day to live with joy, even on the bad days. And I encourage other people to live with joy. And part of my purpose is helping other people realize that joy is not a product of our circumstances. Joy is a choice that we make. Even when we're not always having the most fun. I thought about this the other day. I was running, and I think I like to have run more than I like to actually run, right? Because especially this time of year, it's super hot. I mean, we're in Georgia. It's, the days of summer are just, the temperatures are just brutal to be outside and running in these conditions. And it was one of those days where it was just, I think it was 77 degrees when I started running. 77 degrees when I started. And that was before the sun had come up. I mean, that was as cool as it got that whole night. And so I started running, and it was a long run day. And of course, the sun comes up and it just starts to get hotter and hotter. And it's not just the heat, it's the humidity here in Georgia. And it was like, 95% humidity when I started, and 77 degrees. And that's just uncomfortable temperatures to walk outside in, much less to start running. And of course, as I was running, I was getting hotter and hotter. And then, that tends to make your heart rate go up. And long story longer, as someone once said, is that it just was not a fun run. It was just brutal. It was just one of those days that I'm glad it was over, right? I was just glad to be done running. And I thought about that, and even as uncomfortable physically as I was, and it was not any fun, let me just tell you. It doesn't mean that I cannot still have joy in the moment. And I did. It was kind of one of those days when you're like, man, I feel bad. I'm hot. I'm sweating. I'm soaking wet, and just completely soaking wet. But I have joy in my life as I'm running, because joy isn't dependent on my physical circumstances. It's just a choice that we make. And I know that that's not easy to do. And I know there's some people don't, or have just never thought about, they can still have joy even when they're not comfortable, or they're not having the best day, or things aren't going right. That's the power of being proactive, is choosing to be proactive and choosing to create our own emotional weather, right? That means that when it rains, you don't have a bad day because you create your sunshine inside. Anyway, I kind of got off on a little bunny trail there, but that is one of my top values, is choosing to live every day with joy. And I want to help other people, right, recognize how good it can be, right? It's just choosing not to let what happens drag us down. Now, I don't always get that right. Certainly not. There are days that are going to be easier than others. And my second top value is love. And love is a verb, which means it's an action, it's a decision. I start with loving me, and then I extend that love to others. Now, I love you even if I've never met you. I don't have to know you to love you, because I'm choosing to share in what I've learned in my journey. I'm choosing to share that with you. And I do this podcast because I love sharing that with you. And I want you to reach your potential in life, whatever that looks like for you, right? Love is a choice that we make. And so it causes us to do things differently. When you love someone, you value them, you'll do things for them, right? It's a choice that we make. So there again, those are probably not your top values, and that's okay. All I'm saying is you intentionally choose your values, and then you intentionally live them. Until next time.
Start increasing your influence and maximizing your potential with Ria's audiobooks. Available at audible.com, amazon.com, and iBooks. Please visit riastory.com to learn about Ria's books, resources, speaking, and training programs. Thanks for listening.